You're locked in, and my name is Algenon Cash. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me. Hope everyone is having a great day. Got another great discussion for you today. I've got Ken Raymond, who is a former member of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, also a former chairman of the Forsyth County Board of Elections, Black conservative author, community activist, and leader. We're going to have a conversation with him today. But before we get into the main conversation, just a couple of news stories that I want to update for you guys that I've been following. Tech's Legal Shield draws substantive scrutiny. That's an article that was in the New York Times, and it's talking about a law that has legally shielded online platforms. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act has long been mentioned by lawmakers as a potential target for reform. And if you've been keeping up with what's going on in Capitol Hill, the Judiciary Committee has been holding hearings with the CEO of Twitter as well as Facebook to talk a little bit about sort of how they handled social media posts during the election. And it is increasingly seeming like Republicans in the Senate would like to place further restrictions and regulations on these social media giants. What's so surprising to me is that this may actually finally be an issue that Republicans and Democrats agree on. Democrats have wanted to put more limits on these social media companies for quite some time now. Republicans always, being the free market people that we are, did not want to place further regulations on these social media companies. But I think as a result of the 2020 election, that mood has shifted and changed quite a bit. So I would tell you that I think in January, once we get past the lame duck session, I would keep an eye out for a bipartisan bill. Might actually be one of the first bipartisan bills that you see in the new Congress that will be aimed at Facebook, Twitter, and some of these social media giants. As you've heard me talk about, a lot of conservatives have actually been deserting the Facebook and Twitter platform in exchange for more conservative-based apps like Parler and several others that have been getting attention. I continue to believe that particular tactic is a little bit dangerous simply because conservatives must be careful not to concede the battleground. And if we just all of a sudden become absent on Facebook, then all of a sudden our message is no longer relevant, which I feel like is the same thing that's happened in academia and media. We often complain that these two institutions are dominated by liberals, but decades ago, we conceded the battleground. We chose not to compete and participate. And now you do have liberals that dominate academia and media. So I think conservatives need to make sure we look closely at history, make sure we keep up the fight, stay a thorn in the side of all these liberals on Facebook and Twitter, and make sure that we continue to share our message. Also in news closer to home, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper has announced a new COVID-19 alert system, which will address community spread in North Carolina by county. The system uses metrics informed by the White House Coronavirus Task Force and North Carolina's key metrics to categorize counties into three tiers: yellow, orange, and red. Red obviously being critical community spread. A lot of us was really anticipating that the governor may come out today and actually place additional restrictions on restaurants, bars, and gyms. I had heard the same from a number of insiders down in Raleigh who anticipated that happening. What he did end up doing is I think he ended up placing more responsibility on local government to do it. And so to some degree, he's shifted that responsibility down to the locals. And I think he's going to try to place additional leverage on these local governments to actually carry out some of the executive orders that he's issued. As many of you know, we've had a really uneven enforcement apparatus when it comes to these executive orders. And that's simply because a lot of these counties, especially county sheriffs and police chiefs and mayors, have said that they are not going to enforce these executive orders. Well, now it seems like we're moving into a phase where Cooper is essentially saying he's going to identify and spotlight counties and local governments where there are critical hotspot areas. He's going to be really placing a lot of leverage on these communities to try to enforce his executive orders. They have already sent out a letter outlining a number of enforcement tactics that these local governments can deploy, which includes fines, penalties, revoking business permits, health permits for restaurants, and et cetera. And so I think this is going to be really interesting over the next few weeks to see if counties and cities, local governments, actually play ball with the governor. The governor did also leave the door open, had a little bit of a threat at the end of the press conference that if local government does not play ball, if they do not reduce the spread in their local communities, the governor is prepared to do some type of a statewide mandate or take statewide action that could place us back in phase one type restrictions where restaurants would only be able to do takeout service, bars would be closed altogether, as well as gyms and a wide range of other small businesses. So this is something to watch. The current executive order that we're operating under does expire on December the 5th. And so I would expect that if we don't see some dramatic movement in these numbers over the next 2 to 3 weeks, then, that first week in December, you could certainly see the Governor Cooper coming back out and extending some of these restrictions and perhaps even maybe implementing a statewide mask mandate and so forth. And then there's still the risk that when President-elect Joe Biden takes office on January 20th, there is a lot of chatter and rumors around the possibility of a complete nationwide lockdown along with a nationwide mask mandate. So these are going to be, this is going to be an interesting winter. I like to remind people that we're not even in winter yet. We're still in the fall. And so this is going to get really interesting as we get into December and possibly into the new year. So my prayers continue to be with all the small business owners and others out there that are trying to figure out how to navigate and try to keep their employees and their customers safe while also protecting their livelihood. So today on Locked In, I've got Ken Raymond, who is locking in with me. I've known Ken for a very long time. Back when I first got involved with the local Forsyth County Republican Party, Ken was always a staple at those Monday meetings, and always enjoyed talking to him and learning from him. He's a wealth of information, especially not only when it comes to conservatism, but more specifically, Black conservatism. He has a tremendous amount of facts and history. Ken, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Algenon. I hope you are.
I am well, man. I am well. Glad to reconnect with you. And you're always making headlines, man. You're a former chairman of the Forsyth County Board of Elections. You made headlines back then. Mm-hmm. Then you obviously just resigned during the latest election as a member of the North Carolina State Board of Elections. Apparently, it sounded like you took issue with how our elections board wanted to handle these absentee ballots, and you and the other Republican member resigned in protest. So that made additional headlines.
Yes, it was actually a settlement agreement on the lawsuit.
And you've actually got a book out that we're going to touch on too as well. But yeah, let's start with the elections process. Help us understand what really happened with the State Board of Elections.
Well, the North Carolina Board of Elections was one of about 300 states that was being sued over our election laws. We were sued by organizations that wanted us to change our election laws because of COVID. And in this particular case, our director entered into an agreement with one of the plaintiffs to have some kind of agreement in place, before elections. Well, so we went into a meeting and discussed what kind of settlement that we could probably work out with the plaintiffs. What I didn't want, now what the plaintiffs wanted was they wanted too much. They wanted to eliminate the witness agreement on the absentee ballots, and they wanted a number of other things. What myself and the other Republican board member, we were trying to avoid difficulty in administration of elections because we had been through that in 2018 where, if you recall, the General Assembly and the governor, they were going back and forth as far as how the board would be constituted. Would it be 5 members or would it be 9 members? We were going back and forth, and it was an election year. So it made the administration of election very difficult. So what we were trying to avoid that scenario once again. And what we were told by our counsel with the AG's office, Josh Stein's office, we were told that we were likely going to lose the lawsuit. if we did not make some kind of concession agreement. And we worked something out, we hammered something out, and the bottom line was what we agreed to was not what we voted on and what we agreed to in the settlement agreement. It wasn't it wasn't the end product. They were miles apart. And as a matter of fact, I contacted some of our staff and I asked them, please send me a copy of what we actually voted on. And I looked at that and I looked at the settlement agreement itself, and it was miles apart. And it turned out that it appeared to me as if, and it turned out to be the actual case, that the attorneys from Josh Stein's office, they were not honest with us in terms of a number of things. One of those things was that one of the items that we agreed to was already ruled upon by not only a federal judge, but a three judge panel, and basically saying that we couldn't do it, but yet we voted to do it. So I couldn't trust what the attorneys from the Attorney General's office were telling us not only for that case, but any of the cases pending. And we had basically, the Board of Elections had basically given the plaintiffs in the case everything that they wanted. And they wanted looser election laws, looser integrity laws. They wanted to extend the deadline for the receiving absentee ballots. And there was absolutely nothing that myself and the other Republican board member could do. So after talking with some about it, the best thing that we thought we could do was just simply step aside and let the General Assembly handle it. And that's what we did.
Well, I want to dig in on two issues because I know it from listening to you speak and then just from watching some of the coverage through the election. There seemed to be two issues that really emerged. You had the witness agreement that you talked about that obviously removed the requirement for any kind of a witness agreement on absentee ballots and I guess mail-in ballots. Then you had the actual extension that allowed ballots to come in after Election Day as long as they were postmarked on Election Day.
Uh-huh.
With the witness agreement, help us understand because Harold Eustache, who I know you know as well.
Yes.
We had him on the show and he really got into this conversation. I was really intrigued by the discussion. And correct me if I'm wrong, if you remove this witness agreement, which is the only measure protecting whether or not you are actually the person who say you are that's casting that ballot. If you remove the witness agreement, how do we ensure the integrity of the absentee ballot or mail-in ballot process?
Well, you can't. And when it came to the witness agreement, what was written in the settlement agreement was if there were a problem with the witness portion on the envelope, whether the witness didn't completely fill out the witness section, there was maybe an address missing or some item of information regarding the witness that was missing. What the Board of Elections agreed to was that the individual who actually voted on that ballot could fix the witness agreement themselves. Therefore, the voter himself could act as his own witness for the most part within that situation. So that's what we objected to. And that's one thing that the Republican board member, he pointed out very well that if there's a problem with the witness agreement, if there's a problem, if the witness on the absentee ballot made an error of some kind and it has to be fixed and you allow the voter to fix it, you essentially don't need a witness. And that's what the main problem with the witness agreement was. And that's what Senator Phil Berger and Speaker Moore objected to strenuously.
So in an election year where we know we're going to have a high number of mail-in ballots and most likely absentee ballots simply because of the virus and people being fearful to come out to polling locations, why in a year where we know we're going to have a higher volume of ballots would we actually weaken the protections? Doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't make sense. And actually, the General Assembly actually made some adjustments to the election laws. The General Assembly met and they adjusted election laws to uh, uh, adjust for COVID. And they didn't. The director didn't get everything that she asked for, but they conceded some things, and it turned out not to be enough because then the lawsuit came and the settlement, and then we entered, or the staff entered into a settlement agreement. And as a result of the settlement agreement, that's when they ended up getting everything they wanted.
Are there any other states around the country that did the same in terms of weakening the witness agreement provision?
Well, as it turns out, there were a number of states, as I mentioned before. Uh, there were organizations, Democrat organizations, liberal groups, who had filed, last I heard, it was about 300 lawsuits all over the country against boards of elections in states, demanding that they change their election laws, loosen their election laws to accommodate for COVID. And it was pretty much the same scenario that we had here.
If you're just now joining us, you're locked in. I'm your host, Algenon Cash, and you're also listening to Ken Raymond. Ken Raymond is a former member of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, former chairman of the Forsyth County Board of Elections, and also an author. We're having a conversation about the election 2020, and there's just still so many questions about the election process and some of the voting irregularities and even allegations of fraud in the midst of this election. So we're trying to learn from someone who's an expert and has many, many years working through this process. The other issue that Harold raised with me was about the extension for the deadline.
Yes.
And it sounded like to me, and I'm no attorney, I try to pretend to be one some days, but based on the state constitution, the General Assembly would have had the authority to weigh in on whether or not any extensions were made, but it sounded like the General Assembly got circumvented. So how did the extension even get in place if the General Assembly didn't have an opportunity to weigh in?
That was done through the staff's interpretation of the emergency acts, that emergency powers that a director can use during a crisis. There was some disagreement as far as what powers a director has and what they can do in a situation of an outbreak. And based on their interpretation, the Board of Elections interpretation, staff interpretation of that law, they believe that they could adjust election law, tweak it in that manner. The General Assembly disagreed, and that's how we ended up in these court battles over.
And so, are these court battles ongoing, or at this point they've announced the winner? So, does those cases get dismissed, or where do we stand in that process?
Well, I believe the General Assembly is going to revisit this and make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Last I read on Phil Berger's website, he implied that they are going to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. They're going to review election laws, review emergency powers regarding the powers of the executive, the director of the Board of Elections, to ensure that they're all on the same page when it comes to a crisis during an election year.
So the president is refusing to concede, and a number of Republicans across the country, the nation, is supporting him. Some actual members of the Senate and the House, and many others part of whether it be state legislative bodies across the country. He's alleging fraud, and people say that fraud doesn't happen in these elections. All these elections are fraud-free. You've worked in elections for a long time at the county level, now the state level. Mm-hmm. Does fraud happen in these elections? Is that something that is real? Is that something we should be talking about right now?
Yes, fraud does happen. Fraud does exist. And I believe fraud happened in this election, and we ought to let the process play out. We ought to let the evidence be heard and let the process move forward. I do not believe we have the final outcome. I believe it was completely irresponsible for the national media to declare Joe Biden the winner. The media does not have the authority to do that. They should let the process play out, and then we'll see. I believe that there are 6 states that either are in the midst of recounts, or there's a lawsuit pending, or some kind of challenge pending. And if you set those states aside, neither Trump or Biden has the 270 number of electoral votes to be president. So we just ought to simply wait for every recount and every court challenge to play out, and then we'll know.
So help us understand the recount. And the reason I asked this question, Ken, because an interesting story came out, may have been today. I've been reading some reports about it today, where in Georgia, where they're going through a manual recount right now, in a certain county, and the name of the county I'm drawing a blank on, but in a certain county, they found over 2,000 votes that went, or 2,500 votes that went for Trump, or a majority of them actually went to Trump. For us that don't work in this process, we're not close enough to it. How does that happen? How do you all of a sudden get into a recount process and find 2,500 votes? And if they found 2,500 votes in one county, I mean, are we wrong to assume they could find thousands of votes in other counties?
No, we're not wrong to assume that at all. And I think it's interesting that of all the stories that we're hearing of ballots being lost, whether it's in Georgia or it's in Pennsylvania, they all happen to be Trump ballots. I have not heard any stories of any Biden supporters, their ballots being lost. As a matter of fact, what I hear is more Biden ballots being found and added into the mix. But yes, it can certainly happen. You have, unfortunately, there are hyper partisans working in elections. And that's why it's important that you have observers watching what they do, that the entire process be transparent. That's part of the problem in Philadelphia. That's one of the main problems in Philadelphia. What I understand is that the elections board and the election staffs in several counties, they will not allow Republican observers to watch. So how in the world can Republican voters trust that the election is fair, that the counting process is fair? You have to have both sides agree that the end product, the end result is fair, or you've got a major problem. If after an election, after a national election, the Republicans that voted for their candidate do not believe that the process was fair, then you've got half of American voters out here that don't trust the process, and a major problem. If on the other hand, the Democrats, let's say all the Republicans came out on top, yet the Democrats do not believe the process was fair, then it's still a problem. You have to have both sides agree that the final outcome is the truth. Therefore, both sides will accept it. And no one can accept these results under these conditions. You've got poll observers being left out, being completely isolated, being told that they have to stand maybe 100 or so feet away to observe election workers count ballots. You've got ballots being lost. I've heard a story about mail carriers losing mail-in ballots from certain Republican districts and areas in Pennsylvania. The public has to be able to trust the process. So that's why I say that we have to let it play out. We have to let the Trump campaign, if they have evidence, let it heard, let the other side refute it or challenge it. And then at the end of the day, we'll see.
If you're just now joining us, you are locked in. I'm Algenon Cash. We're having a discussion with Ken Raymond, a former member of the North Carolina State Board of Elections and former chairman of the Forsyth County Board of Elections. It's still time. You still have time to ask a question. Just leave it in the comment section. Or if you just want to leave a comment for Ken to see later on, do that as well. I'll tell you, Ken, Reginald Reed is watching, and he says, "Amen, Ken." I'm sure you know Reginald here locally in Forsyth County. Reginald, we appreciate you tuning in today. One of my final questions before we get into a little quick discussion about the book. What needs to happen with the election process in this country, Ken? I mean, do we need a major overhaul or restructuring as to how we do elections? I know right now the state constitutions across the country sort of outline procedures for each state to handle their own election. Do we need to move to more of a federal election system?
No.
What are your ideas as to how do we get to a point where voters can once again trust the integrity and the outcomes of these elections?
Well, first of all, I do not believe, I've heard this ever since election night, that possibly, maybe, elections, control over elections may have to go to the federal level. That is a bad idea. I believe that it will not work if you give the federal government control over elections in every state. That's not going to work. What needs to happen, I believe, is transparency. You have to let individuals, you have to let both sides watch what's going on, and you have to let the public watch what's going on. And also you have to, I believe having these extended time, the additional days added to the end of election day, I believe that causes problems. Because, well, let's take this election, for example. Here in North Carolina, under law, the no elections board should accept ballots after you have election day, but after November 5th, that's it. No more ballots can come in at that time. Yeah, but if you extend it and then something happens down the road and somebody finds ballots during that time period, then you're going to have problems. You're going to have people distrusting the system. The problem with extending, prolonging election, I don't know, you can't call it election day anymore. You have to call it election season because it begins 17 days before. It begins 17 days before election day and continues for weeks after election day. So it's more of an election season now than election day. And when you have a situation like that, you're opening the door for fraud. You really are, because after election night, if you have individuals or bad actors that really are trying to steal an election, and on election night they see that a candidate has a certain number of votes, they then know how many votes that they need to produce for their candidate to win, if they can do this at all, if they have the resources and the capability to do this. If they have a number at the end of election night that could get their candidate over the top and beyond the point where the other candidate can ask for a recount, then they know how many they can produce. So extending the election season for days and weeks after election day, that you're just opening the door for fraud. So you have to cut it off much sooner. I think 2 days after election day, that's plenty of time to cut this off. Back to your question, what needs to happen? You need to have transparency. You need to have fairness. You need to abide by the law. And what happened this year with the State Board of Elections and the General Assembly, that creates problems too. You had basically the Board of Elections usurping the authority of the General Assembly. Only the General Assembly can make or change election laws. The General Assembly under the Constitution has that authority. But yet when you have the Board of Elections through provisions of an emergency powers law, try to usurp authority from the General Assemblies, then people's ears perk up and they get suspicious. What's going on? So if you simply just follow the law, follow the Constitution, have transparency in the process, then you can get through an election year with the voters and the people trusting the system.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is that we don't necessarily need the federal government to step in and overtake the state's roles in these elections. And we just need to follow the current state laws and mandates and stick to that process and not make it up as we go, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly, and have transparency on both sides, and for the public to watch the process and how it's working out and how it's playing out.
So Ken, you wrote a book. You're actually, you told me offline that you're already working on your second book, but
Yeah.
you did send me some information about the Black political history from the Ark of Safety into the Mouth of the Lion by Ken Raymond. Ken, tell us a little bit about the book.
Here's the book right here. Black political history from the Ark of Safety into the Mouth of the Lion. First of all, I'll tell you the title of the book I borrowed from a letter written by Frederick Douglass that I found at the Library of Congress website, in which he described, in the letter, he described the best place for former slaves and Blacks politically. He described it as the Ark of Safety. And the place of danger and risk, he described it as the Mouth of the Lion. And if you want to know which is which, you have to buy the book.
Where can they pick up the book? Is that on Amazon or?
Book is available on Amazon and on Barnes and Noble, and it tracks the journey of former slaves and Black Americans since the end of the Civil War, every political milestone and step made since the end of the Civil War through today.
And Ken, one thing I know about you ever since I met you since day one, you've always been someone that's passionate about history.
Yes.
And you've always been someone that's passionate about Black conservatism. Why?
Well, I believe it's who I am for one thing, and I believe in conservatism. I really do. Conservatism is basic. It's common sense. It's basic common sense. And conservatism honors God. I was thinking about that earlier today, as a matter of fact, about my own personal experience. After turning 18, I registered Democrat like most Black people do. I registered Democrat and I voted Democrat for years, almost 10 years actually. And it was in, I think it was 1992, where, actually, no, let me back up. It was in 1990, where I realized that I could not support the Democrat Party anymore. I could list a number of reasons why, but I couldn't do it anymore. But the bottom line of it is that I saw and I realized that the Democrats were anti-God. They did not believe in God, and they demonstrated a hostility towards Christianity. I saw that for myself in my 20s. So during that time, and I realized that, I said, okay, and I checked out the Republicans, and they were the actual opposite of that. So I decided myself, okay, what I could do is just simply vote Republican and remain a Democrat. So that's what I did. And until 1992, I realized I couldn't do that anymore. So I registered as a Republican because conservatism respects Christianity and it honors Christianity. And that's one of the main reasons I turned to it. I turned to the Republican Party. I did not know the historical aspects of everything. I did not know, for example, when I switched from Democrat to Republican in 1992, I didn't know anything about the Republican role in passing the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. I did not know about the Republican role in passing the 14th Amendment or the 15th Amendment that gave Blacks the right to vote. I didn't know any of that. The only thing I knew was that the Republican Party respected Christianity and honored God, and the Democrats did not. That's all I knew. The studying history and developing a passion for history came later.
Well, I always like to remind people that I'm not a walk away. I've always been a Republican, so I didn't walk away from the Democratic Party. I first became a Republican. This sort of blows people's mind, but I first became a Republican when I was in the 5th grade, when George Bush was running against Michael Dukakis, and they asked us they told us to go home and consult with our parents that tomorrow we were going to have a straw poll and we had to vote in the presidential election. And of course, I didn't know anything about either candidate. I'm only 10 years old. But when I asked my mom who to vote for, she said Michael Dukakis. And me being inquisitive, I was inquisitive even back then. I said, well, why should we support Dukakis? And she said, he's the Democrat and Black people vote for Democrats. And so, to be honest with you, Ken, I went back in the next day. I cast my straw for George Bush, not because I knew much about George Bush or the Republican Party, but I wanted to be rebellious. But it did open the door for me to start learning and learning some of the things that you're talking about. And to be honest with you, Ken, I don't know if a lot of people tell you this, but keep putting your post on Facebook. I see a lot of them, and it almost every time I go by one, I learn something new when I read through it really quick, or I click on the link to whatever you're sharing. And so you are reaching and touching people with your post and the content that you're sharing. And hopefully my audience will go out and check out your book. I need to go check it out myself and see what it's about. And I do want to ask one other question before I let you go, because you're also a former, I didn't bring this up, you're a former member of the Board of Trustees at Winston-Salem State University, which is an HBCU here based in Winston-Salem. I also used to teach a commercial real estate class over there and also did some work for their foundation at one point. I'm just curious, I have to ask this question. How receptive or maybe not receptive is WSSU to a Black conservative? I gotta ask this question. How much conflict did you keep creating those board meetings?
Oh, there were a lot of protests from students at my arrival because when I was on the local board, Forsyth County Board of Elections, when was that? One year. What I decided to do was, okay, it was an election year, and there were a group of students there at the board meeting that wanted to have an early voting site at Winston-Salem State. And I argued against it because there have been problems over there, well-publicized problems with the staff. And I saw them myself when I was an election worker over there. That was back in 2010. When that happened, that was back in 2010. And when I became a member of the Board of Trustees, they didn't forget that. They didn't forget that at all. So there were individuals, local Democrats, who rallied some of the students and reminded them that years ago, that Ken Raymond, he would not allow, when he was on the local Board of Elections, he would not allow an early voting site at Winston-Salem State. And so there was a lot of opposition. There were people out there with signs during trustee meetings saying, asking for my removal. There was a lot of controversy. And well, at the end of the day, just to finish that story, what I decided to do was to treat Winston-Salem State the same way we treat Wake Forest and the same way we treat Salem College. And that wasn't good enough.
Wow.
So there was some conflict. Not among the board members, not among the trustee members, but some of the students, they did not like my participation or being a member of the board.
Well, Ken, I hope that you will. Not hope. I already know. I know you're going to stay active here in our community, and you'll be doing something again here soon. And I'm actually going to be out at the Golden Corral on Monday for the Republican meeting. Maybe I'll run into you if you get by there. We're going to be talking about the Black Conservative Alliance, which is a new project that I'm working on. And I'd love to share more insight about what that is. I think someone like you would probably be attracted to what we're doing. So maybe I'll see you on Monday. Again, to my audience, thank y'all for joining us. Ken Raymond, former member of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, former chairman of the Forsyth County Board of Elections, former trustee at Winston-Salem State University, and he's also an author. And so I would encourage you to go find his book, find him on Facebook, connect with him. Like I said, he's a wealth of information, shares a lot of great political history and facts almost on a daily basis. So go check him out. I'll be back with you. I've got later in this week, I'll have Garrett Holloway coming on to join me. Garrett Holloway is a city councilman down in Lexington. He's also a Democrat. He supported the Biden-Harris ticket. So him and I are going to have an interesting conversation about who he supported and who he voted for. So make sure you join us for that discussion. Like I said, this upcoming Monday, I'll be speaking at the Forsyth County Republican meeting, which is at Golden Corral at noon at Haynes Mall Boulevard. So come over and break bread with us, and I'll be sharing some good information. Until then, y'all stay locked in. All right, Ken, I think we're good.